physical media and entertainment from the silver screen to the palm of your hand. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of From Screen to Shelf. My name is Will. I'm here with Gabe and Chase. We're going to be doing a little something different today, everybody. We've been talking about horror movies for most of the month. It is still spooky month. We got a great episode coming out to end our October run here, I should say. But for today, we wanted to take a little break from the spookiness and get into something a little different. We're going to be talking about our overrated and underrated movies. We each picked an overrated film and an underrated film that we're going to talk about, and we're probably going to get into a little bit of a debate depending on what our picks are.
Friendly debate.
Friendly debate, yeah. And we should also mention, too, before we actually get into this, our overrated movies, we just want to let everybody know before we dive in here that we don't actually dislike these movies. We just feel like they're overrated and overhyped. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad films. So we want to preface that and get that out there, just so the haters, don't have anything to come after us for. We just want to clarify, an overrated movie doesn't mean that we dislike it. We're just thinking that, it probably got more attention and hype than we think it might have deserved. So just want to put that out there. But Chase, I think you're going to start off here. Now, you picked an underrated movie, I believe, that you want to start off with that we don't know about, Gabe and I. So if you want to get into that.
I think it's his overrated movie he's starting off with.
It is his overrated. Yeah, if your overrated film, you'll start off with that, and we'll get right into it. So we're both eagerly awaiting your pick here. So I'll send it over to you to get going.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to throw this your guys' way because I intentionally held out because I wanted to live capture your guys' emotions. Blade Runner. I genuinely...
I'm trying not to leave the call right now. I'm trying not to leave the call.
I knew I had a feeling that it was going to be... I'm not lying. When you said that I looked over to my shelf, it's sitting right in the middle. I could see the steelbook from where I'm sitting, dude. And I was like, I guarantee you he's going to pick this fucking movie.
Yep.
How? Okay, yeah, go into the how, and then we can...
Yeah, it's like... I just don't know why it doesn't capture me. It has some great cinematography. It's one of those movies, as much as I live and breathe horror, believe it or not, sci-fi is my favorite genre. So whenever I first got a hold of it, I was a teenager, stuff like that, and I just found it so dull. My attention span was shorter then, so then I've rewatched it once I got a hold of the 4K, immaculate transfer, by the way. But it's just, I can never remember what that movie is about every single time I watch it. The acting is great, it's got some really great story tropes. I find it to be very slow paced. I find it to be, to me, rather forgettable every time I watch it. And hot take, I do find Blade Runner 2049 to be better than the original. I think Dennis does a great job with anything that he does, but yeah, the original Blade Runner. That's why I wanted to hold off and get your guys' thoughts, because I knew this would kind of get us a little bit more into that debate jabby area. But yeah, I find it to be a passable movie. I don't ever eagerly await to rewatch it, even though it's a movie that you would think is made for me. Everything about it, the AI, Harrison Ford, I love everything that he's in. The Fugitive, Air Force One. Indiana Jones, I find him to be one of the greatest actors of that era. I love Harrison Ford. So I don't know. I can't even tell you outside of the final fight. And of course, preface this, all of these are going to have spoilers in there. I felt like that didn't need to be said, but yeah.
They've been out for a while.
Yeah, all these movies have been out and had time to marinate and form an opinion on. We aren't going to really be talking about anything that came out in the last 5 years based on what we kind of talked about before this. But the only thing I can remember, that dude that looks like Dolph Lundgren, that little final standoff towards the end. Mm-hmm. That's really all I can ever remember. And I remember the lady, whenever she's running and she hits her hand in the glass. I just remember that because I remember watching a behind-the-scenes featurette that she actually cut her hand and they kept rolling. And so she actually sliced her hand on that window. Whenever that was shot, she actually fell, and that was a real slip. And she just kept going with it. I mean, I can respect the movie for what it is. It's like I said, I don't it's not a 1 out of 10 to me. It's not a 2 out of 10. I still will give it a respectable, 6 out of 10 and stuff. It's just, I genuinely can't understand why it's got the cult status that it does. I think Ridley Scott's got much better movies out there. But yeah, that's pretty much my soap opera on Blade Runner.
Did you say a 6 out of 10?
Yeah. I find that movie to be very dull and boring.
You want to correct yourself? I'm giving you the opportunity to correct yourself right now.
Gabe, do you just want to deal with this? I'm going to go grab a bottle of some alcohol upstairs before I read.
Yeah, I know. Get a shot for me, man. I mean, I guess I. So I mean, I first when you told me that you'd watch it when you were younger,
Yeah.
I thought that maybe that was it. Maybe it was like, oh, your attention span's shorter. Because I there are tons
Yeah.
of movies I've done that with too, where I watched them when I was younger, and I'm like, this is dull, boring. I don't like it. And when I pop the disc in when I'm older, it's you get this like kind of fresh perspective. But it sounds
Yeah.
like that didn't change for you. It sounded like you
Mm-mm.
still had the same reaction, dude. I mean, no, Blade Runner. Oh man, I think it's probably one of the most unique outside of because Star Wars did a good job with this too, obviously setting
Mhm.
like its own like atmosphere and universe. But I would say like Blade Runner is probably one of my favorite like atmosphere, like kind of like yeah, I don't want to say universe because it's I mean it's two movies, but like just the whole setting of it is probably one of the best in like cinematic history. I'd probably even say that.
Oh, the set
Just like
design's
the
amazing.
vibe. Yeah, like the vibe it gives you, kind of like the world that's already kind of established. Like he just kind of throws you in this world with Blade Runners, this is what they do, and this is their job, and like you're just kind of thrown into this world, and I think that's why I appreciate that movie so much because it's not, it doesn't do what like other movies do. It's just kind of like explaining everything to you. I think like the reason really did so well with this one, he kind of like it didn't insult the audience. It's like I'm just throwing you in this freaking world, and you're gonna
Embrace
follow
it.
Harrison Ford. Yeah, embrace and follow Harrison Ford's character, and then you get to the whole kind of moral dilemma with like I forget what they're called. Well, what are they called? The I don't want to. They're not AI. They're like
Yeah,
they're called
sentient, like
replicants.
replicants.
They
Yeah,
call
that's
them.
what sent.
Yeah.
So the whole kind of moral dilemma with like the replicants in terms of like debating like are they human, are
The
they not
humanity.
human, the whole ethical dilemma of it. It's just so freaking good, man, and it's so
Yeah.
freaking engaging. And then I know that you brought up that you said you actually do like the final standoff
Yeah,
because the
I do.
final standoff has like the best monologue in like cinema history, dude,
Yeah,
of all
Yeah.
time.
and I think that's what captivated me again, but especially after seeing 2049, which I know some people do like it more, but not lesser so than more so, right? I
Mhm.
think Ryan Gosling's character as being a replicant, and I feel like this movie's been watched enough. I mean, if you're tuning in this far for Blade Runner original, you've probably
Yeah.
seen 2049. But I feel like that was just so much better done. Like the emotions, everything in between it, the style of it. Like I just really liked 2049 a lot, and I've only seen it once. So like, I mean, I may go back and not like it or back to back it with because I saw Blade Runner and then just popped in 2049 whenever I got the
Mhm.
disc. So I might have a change of opinion in the far future because I'm about to finally hop off the spooky train and go down like a little David Lynch and Alfred Hitchcock month next month. So I
Mhm.
might appreciate a little bit more of this type of stuff, and I'm definitely going to check out some more Ridley Scott stuff because I've never seen Gladiator, which I know that's a great movie
Oh
that you
man.
really like. It's just
Oh, I
I've
love
been
that
waiting for
movie.
the theme for it because I usually
Mhm.
do like themed months or like more dialogue, cinematic heavy months and stuff like that to try to knock out some things and get in the mood instead of just trying to one off in the middle of spooky month. Kind of like Shutter Island. Like, I mean, it's not a horror movie. It's more of a psychological thriller to me. It's got some
Mhm.
horror aspects. But I mean, I
Yeah.
still was able to enjoy that, which that's a 10 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10. That movie's a masterpiece
Yeah.
to me.
And
So,
it's not that, and I'm gonna let Will kind of speak his piece to it too. But like also, I don't debate 2049 at all. I think that like when people tell me that it's as good as Blade Runner, I see it. It's hard for me. The nostalgia just kind of keeps Blade Runner on top for me. But
yeah.
like definitely 2049 is like I think uh Denise like he got it up to that level. 100%. So if someone told me like, hey, 2049 is better than the original, I don't necessarily argue that just because I think he did such a fantastic job with it. And
Hmm.
and like what you said too, Chase, like the whole like you're thrown into the replicant's perspective, right? Of like how does he deal with it and how does he
Yeah.
manage it? So like it's the story is pretty freaking engaging with the sequel, but I think there's the nostalgia for the original just kind of pulls me towards Scott's version or
Yeah.
Scott's installment, I should say. Um, but yeah, man, I mean, I think that's what kind of throws me in. It's just the kind of like this whole you get the sci-fi world, you get this whole ethical dilemma, this whole debate about replicants and how they fit into our world. And I mean, even today, I think it's even more resonating, with like what you said earlier with AI. And I mean, they're actually developing this stuff now, so that world isn't so far fetched anymore. It's
Yeah.
something that, you know, maybe like when we're older, we're we're gonna see replicants walking around. Who knows? But it's something that we'll probably be debating and talking about, and they may even reference Blade Runner. Who knows? But I think it was kind of like it was super far ahead of its time. And it's a movie I super appreciate. So yeah, you got me with that one, dude.
That's why I held off.
100%.
Because I know we talked about
Well,
everybody's pick, but I had to hold that one near and dear because I had to
yeah.
get the live reactions.
Oh man. Well, what do you think?
I agree with. I want to say this. I do agree with 2049. I think Dennis made it palatable to a new
Mhm.
audience, a current generation, I should say, but at the same time bringing and replicating the qualities. Replicating. See what I
Replicating.
did there? Replicating the qualities that made the original so special, right? And the style and the vibe of it. So I agree. 2049 is definitely up there. I still don't think it surpasses Ridley's movie just because again for me it's also nostalgia. And just when I watched this movie, I think it was high school when I first saw it. I was amazed by it. I mean, just the production design to me was incredible and still is. It's I mean, it's probably in my top 5 or top 10 movies. I'd say top 5 for art design.
Mm.
The way that they were able to bring those sets to life, you just felt so engrossed in that world, you know. And
Yeah.
there's really, I don't think I can say I've watched any other movie that kind of brings me close to that. You know, that feeling that I got, you know, watching it. You know, just how amazing everything was done. Like just from the scene to the background, the characters, like when he's in the city walking around like through the streets, and they did that in 2049 very well too. You know, that was a great
Mhm.
movie, but yeah, I just feel like it was so far ahead of its time, and like we got to remember too, it was never meant to be a classic.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
remember reading the production of it was actually horrible. Like it was a nightmare for Ridley Scott to be able to get funding or continue to get funding to keep making it. I think, you know, people always bring up like E.T. I think there's some credence to that. You know, it was released, I think, after E.T. was released. And I mean, the stories just, they're totally opposite, right? Like E.T.
Mhm.
was more of a, you know, human, it was like a human extraterrestrial optimistic, you know, relationship. Whereas Blade Runner was obviously much more bleak and
And technical.
dystopian. And I think
Yeah.
audiences chose
Mhm.
to just go with E.T. And that's how it became a cult classic, right? Originally, but I don't think it's overrated at all. I think it set the blueprint for science fiction films moving forward to this day. Like
Yeah.
you can watch any science fiction movie and pick out a reference to Blade Runner. Like it was almost done so perfectly, like that world was set up so perfectly, like there's no way to really get away from it. Like you
Mhm.
can make a sci-fi movie about anything you want. There's no way to escape it. You know, there's going to be, even if you're not trying to directly reference Blade Runner, or if there's
Yeah.
movies that claim to not be inspired by it, you can still point things out. You'll still see things in those films that will make you think of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Um, I just think nothing comes close. And like you guys talked about, like the ending fight with like the monologue. I mean, that it's like pure poetry. Some of the best writing and acting I've ever seen.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's why I think I like it, because it is incredibly bleak, and I tend to relate to that kind of stuff. I just gravitate towards that. Like I like Korean movies because Korean movies actually take a lot of notes from movies like Blade Runner, and that they're much more bleak in their storytelling, darker, more realistic. Like it's not always a happy ending, right? And usually
Mhm.
there's a choice that has to be made that's very haunting. And that's what I think I can say about Blade Runner as well, is that to me, it's just one of those movies that when you really get into it and you really get underneath the skin, it's just a truly haunting story. You know, the whole idea of replicants questioning, you know, what it is that they are, and then humans,
Mhm.
like in the case of like Harrison Ford's character, like there's this whole debate on what it means to be a human being, right?
Yeah.
And whether or not AI, artificial intelligence, can understand what it means to be a human being, and whether or not they can feel emotions and feel the things that humans feel. So I mean, dude, it's so much more relevant now with everything that we're dealing with. And like even in the film industry, like if we want to reference current
Mhm.
events, there's no better, you know, no better reference than what's happening right now with the writers and the actors. I mean, one of the things that everyone is concerned about is the capability of AI to replace human beings, right? And there's a whole debate as to whether or not AI can be used or should be used to create art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't want to lose that human element, right? The nuances that you get when you have human beings involved in a project or human beings producing art. So that there's a whole debate, within the industry, and within the workforce in general, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think it speaks to that. If we're gonna relate to current events, there's no better thing to call out than what's happening right now with AI. So yeah, as far as being ahead of its time, I mean, dude, that's an understatement. Like it's crazy, how relatable it is even to this day. And
Yeah.
2049 is amazing. I really love that movie, but I think I still like the original better because at the time they didn't have the technology available that they have today. So like even with the models they used and like the way they shot it with the model work and,
Mm-hmm.
and everything like that with the spaceship in the beginning, the shots of the city, just again, it's like those images are burned in my mind.
Yeah.
It's
100%.
something I can't forget. And as I said, I watch plenty of other movies and I can point out references to Blade Runner all day long, no matter
Yeah.
what I see. So its influence is obviously monumental and something that I think will continue to, it'll continue to influence other movies and future movies and projects and directors and artists. So yeah, but I get the criticism of it being, I guess boring, so to speak. Not that you said that, Chase, but that's one I hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it takes its time to build character and build story in such a subtle way. But it's just very poetic to me. So yeah, I
It's a
was
very
surprised by that.
philosophical movie.
Yeah, it
It's
is
it's
for
not your
sure.
typical kind of, and I think a lot of people sometimes, and I'm not saying that's what happened with you, Chase, but I think a lot of people go into Blade Runner and they're just expecting kind of this traditional like sci-fi kind of,
Like style.
good versus bad kind of like,
Yeah, yeah,
huge like fights in the middle of it, and it's like it's really just like more. I mean, it has that detective noir kind of element to it, but it's
mhm,
just a super philosophical analysis about kind of like what everything Will said about what is it to be human, and how do we cope with that or deal with that. So um man, I mean, that definitely led to a reaction, Chase.
That's why I had to hold
That
it dear.
Yeah, man, that's yeah, because I'd put that. I'm trying to think. Maybe I need to sit down and do my top 10 movies of all time because I keep referencing like what I would put in it. But I think Blade Runner would definitely be there. Probably like top 10, top 15 for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And I mean, 2049 is a great mix of style and substance, just like the original is, right? It's
Hmm.
just like you said, you don't really expect like a whole lot of like, or some people might go in, especially for the time that it came out, like a Star Wars y type of sci fi epic and stuff like that. Even if you just look at the set pieces, you might try to piece two and two together and think that it might be something, especially with Harrison Ford being in it.
Hmm.
I
yeah,
feel like, especially at the time, that might have been a very good mentality to approach it. I mean, Harrison Ford sci-fi. Oh, damn. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, maybe over time it'll grow on me. Like, there's tons of movies I didn't like growing up that I hold near and dear to my chest now, you know?
Hmm.
Some still holding strong on that opinion, like Blade Runner, but you never know with time. It's just like, that's not one we're talking about, but I know we agree to a degree that, like, The Shining, I feel like I'm going to like it more as I get older, possibly. And then even
Hmm.
with the back to back to Doctor Sleep. So it might just be one of those things that ends up growing on me. And it's like I said, it's not a bad movie, and I respect it for a lot of the things that it is. I just don't understand like the masterpiece status of it. But
yeah.
again, time will probably tell on that. It's just like some of the Star Wars movies. I don't understand why they have like the cult status that they do outside of it just
Hmm.
being Star Wars, right? It's
Mm,
okay to say when some of them are bad and it's not just the new trilogy. There are some bad ones from back then, even outside the prequels. Like
yeah,
people that vehemently defend Return of the Jedi, man, it's just so incoherent to a degree. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
that
Like,
was definitely like the most generic one
yeah, you
yeah,
know
for
what I
sure.
mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just there's some movies that have that status that it's yeah, just time will tell. Like I used to love Return of the Jedi, and then as I watch it, the more I get older, it's just like what, it
Yeah.
just Star Wars was stepping on its own toes. But I
Mhm.
feel like that's going to be a good segue to one of the ones that we all agree that's underrated or overrated. I'm sorry. Gabe, go and start that one off.
Oh, okay. So my overrated um, is I had to think long and hard about this one, and it's one I actually saw a few weeks back. I think probably that's why it popped up in my head again. Is Stanley Kubrick's, which me saying his name already is probably giving everyone crazy reactions, but Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. Um, I and again, kind of just to preface what Will said at the beginning, it's not that I hate the movie. I think the issue with Full Metal Jacket is you have the first, and I have to get the runtime down. Like maybe it was like the first 30, 40 minutes, I think, where it's just like you're in the boot camp setting. And you're following, these characters as they go through boot camp, and it's a super kind of like intimate, emotional kind of like dynamic that plays out. Um, and it leads to like almost like this climax, like which I think should have just been the film's climax. I mean, you get this climax to where, oh God, what's the actor's name? I don't know the actor's name. I feel bad, but uh, he's the one that's kind of bullied, that's different from the rest of the pack.
Oh,
like
The
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 skinny
bald
guy?
guy, the bald one, the
Oh,
overweight one. Yeah,
Private Pile. Private
yeah,
Pile, but
Pyle. Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
who the actor's name is.
He was recently in the Daredevil series. He played Kingpin. Um,
oh, that was
so
him?
I didn't
yeah,
know that
that's
was the
him.
same guy. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's the same dude. I'm pretty sure if you guys want to
Okay.
look it up and correct me real quick. Sergeant Pyle or Private Pyle, I believe he
Private
played
Pile, I think it is.
Kingpin
Yeah.
in Daredevil. Um, super, super great actor. I remember like watching behind the scenes for Full Metal Jacket, where I think he was talking about how Kubrick like forced him to put on like a whole bunch of weight for the role, actually. So he actually wasn't that heavy prior to filming, but I guess when he was talking to Kubrick about the role, he's like, "No, you need to put on a whole bunch of weight." Because I think that
Wow.
was a part of the aspect of the role, just him being overweight, not being able to keep up with everyone. What's the actor's name? Did you guys?
Vincent
Uh,
D'Onofrio, if
Yeah,
however you say it.
Vincent D'Onofrio.
mm.
He was also in Men in Black. He was, I think, the first guy that gets overtaken by an alien.
Oh, he played the cockroach
The,
exterminator dude.
yeah, that guy. Yeah.
Wow, super. I
Yep.
mean, honestly, he did a great job with that role. But no, yeah. So like, I mean, that climax where Private Pile goes into the restroom with the freaking rifle, you know what I mean? And his eyes, like, it's just a haunting scene, dude, where you just see his eyes, just like you could see like psychologically something's not right there. And I think that first 30 minutes of the movie, first 40 minutes of the movie, it's kind of like what we talked about with Blade Runner. It's so you can take so much of it with like today, you know what I mean, with a lot of the violence that's going on today and like a lot of the mental health issues going today. And then it leads to this climax, and then it's just like over for me at that point. I feel like the whole other part of the movie, which is the probably like the other hour or so, it's nothing really resonates. I think at least personally for me, I just get a little bit bored with it. We're just following these soldiers in Vietnam, um, and nothing sticks out to me outside of just that little, I guess it builds up towards its own little climax with that sniper teenage girl, when they all get pinned down and they have that little kind of moral ethical dilemma, I guess, at that point. But it just didn't resonate with me, because I mean these guys were, I mean, they got on their helmets, born to kill. I know the other guy has the one that says I am become death. So I mean, these guys are they're killing, and then there's a guy in the helicopter. He's mowing down everyone. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't give a shit. So like by the time we get to this point of here's a teenage girl who's sniping you, and she's on the floor. Like, are you going to shoot her or not? I'm like, you guys have just been murdering everyone at this point. So what's the whole deal with this? Like, I just didn't understand it, and it honestly took a lot of the movie away from me. I kind of wish Kubrick had just kind of focused on, and I think it's based off of a book. So I gotta maybe double check that. I don't know if you guys want to look at that for me, but maybe it was based off of a book. Maybe that's why he didn't go that direction. But the first half of the movie, if he just kind of made that into its own movie, I think that would have been a lot better. And the rest of the second half of the film just takes away from that, in my opinion. So when people kind of bring up Full Metal Jacket as one of their favorite Stanley Kubrick films, I get those weird reactions sometimes where I'm like, it's not that great. It's just okay. It's definitely overhyped. What was it, a book? Were you guys able to look that up?
I'm looking that up right now.
I'm
But while
pretty
I'm
sure
looking
it
that up,
was.
I do want to say, to piggyback off of it, because I think you might have touched on it. This movie, as like dark and serious as it can be about the subject matter, has some of the funniest moments in that type of movie. You know, with
Mm.
like some of the things that they say, like with the way that the drill sergeant talks to them.
Oh, dude.
Yeah,
Oh, it's funny.
Some of the
always,
analogies that that he
yeah,
uses is freaking hysterical.
yeah. So I mean, I think one of the things that it does do really well that I think resonates with people, as much as I purely agree, I find, you know, the last 20-25 minutes, whenever I believe it's like the flamethrower scene, where they're all going around and doing that, and they kind of the climax of the movie.
Mhm.
I liked that. That was my favorite part, but otherwise, I just felt like it was just a very. It didn't have, at least to me, that signature Kubrick differentiator, if you know what I mean, with some of the cinematography, especially during the first 45-50 minutes. There was nothing that screamed to me, this is Stanley Kubrick. You know what I mean? Like you would
Yeah.
get out of 2001, that you'd get out of even The Shining, that you would
Yeah.
get out of Clockwork Orange, Paths of Glory. All of those have a signature style. And yeah, it does not look like
It's based off of a book. I did look it up.
the short
it is,
timers.
Yeah, the short timer. So
Yeah.
I've never read the short timer, so I don't know if it's, if the plot in that book kind of takes the same approach. But I mean, regardless, I think, Kubrick at the same time, I can't give him a pass on that because, he took The Shining and just went, he did his own thing with it. I mean, there are
Yeah.
elements of that book that he completely changed and he really didn't give a shit because he said it served the story that he wanted to tell.
Yeah.
So I can't give him a pass on that, even if it's based on a book. I mean, I think you made two different movies and you mushed them into one, with the first half just being the better movie. Honestly, like if I sometimes get tempted to stop watching, like after Pyle shoots himself in the head and then it kind of fades to black. I at that point I kind of want to stop watching it just because the first half is just so good. I don't care about the second half of the movie.
Oh, really? So that might be where we differentiate. I don't care about the first half, and I kind of like the second half a little bit more.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's just
Interesting.
it's really just the comedic relief. Otherwise, it's just another basic training thing with some other aspects where it's like the comedic relief sprinkled in, and then the script. I mean, the dialogue's always great throughout the entire movie. I will give it that. The dialogue really carries the movie, and especially with a Pyle and stuff like that, where you said it fades to black. I think it gets a little bit stronger after that. It's really just the climax because it shows you a very, very dark side. But like to your point, like you really don't really relate for these people too much because they're all in the military to kind of, I mean, depending on who you are as a viewer, I mean, like you really don't want to root for these people to just go and kill, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I find the second half to be a little bit stronger, but overall, like I do find it personally, and I don't think Kubrick really misses that much. I find Paths of Glory to be his best war-based movie for sure.
Mhm.
I
agree with that.
Yeah, Paths of Glory.
100%.
It really shows a lot of things that I think Full Metal Jacket was really trying to like relay, like the PTSD, shell shock, and stuff like that. Like that's a very strong message, and he did it so well, and like kind of a little bit of a sprinkled in like court drama. This one just really felt like a comedic-ish, dark-ish war movie that, I mean, some people hold up there in high regards, and that's kind of what we're talking about. It's just I find it a little bit overrated. It's not that it's bad, like we've said.
Yeah.
I just feel like he even himself did better before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you worded it really well when you said like it just doesn't have that Kubrick like identity to it, like with the cinematography or just some of the cuts or just kind of that unique stamp that it's Kubrick. Like I kind of don't get that, and I would say maybe at least for me personally, I got it more from the first half than the second half. I know we kind of differ there, but I just it kind of throws me overboard with the second half. At that point, I'm just kind of disinterested in it, and I don't care about following the characters, to be honest. But that's just my perspective on it. Will, what do you think of Full Metal Jacket?
I agree. I'm more in Gabe's corner on this in terms of what part of the movie I like better. I think the first half does it for me, and I kind of lose interest, after Pyle kills himself, unfortunately. But I will say, out of all the Kubrick movies I've seen, well, you guys were talking about like his identity as a filmmaker in terms of his style. It's the one movie that just seems disjointed,
Yep.
out of
Mhm.
everything he's done. There's a few things I have to rewatch. But out of his major movies, I think this is the only one that it kind of loses that. And that's why I think like even when I look at it, like when I think of Kubrick movies, I never think of this. I never think of Full Metal Jacket, and
Mhm.
I think that's why.
Yeah.
Because when I think of his movies, I think of his style. I think of those images and the camera setups and just his way of directing. And this movie never pops into my head when I'm having those kind of conversations with someone or just thinking about it. So yeah, I will say this. I was really enthralled by the first half. The
Mhm.
training montage at the camp and the sergeant. That's all so well done. And I just think, once they get into the war scenes, it just kind of loses. It just loses steam for me.
Mhm.
I compare it a lot to Boogie Nights in terms of transitioning
Mhm.
because Boogie Nights has that whole first setup where everything's kind of lighthearted and all these characters are having fun, and then you have that scene at the party where William H. Macy's character, it's a similar situation. He shoots
Yeah.
himself in the head, and from that point on, the movie just gets bleak.
Mhm.
I
Mm.
just That's a movie that I look at not to compare the two stylistically because they're so different. I mean, two completely different directors, but I just think Boogie Nights is an example of transitioning well. It was much better, or I don't want to say it was done better, but I just think it was handled more appropriately. And in Full Metal Jacket, it's like you guys said, I feel like I'm kind of watching two different films that were kind of spliced together, and
Mhm.
and that's what it feels like. It doesn't feel coherent. It doesn't feel complete. Like that transition doesn't feel natural. Whereas
Yeah.
with a movie like Boogie Nights, I can watch that over and over again and it doesn't take me out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like as soon as the whole first half was over, when they're done with the training camp, I was just, and to this day, it's where I lose interest. So yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with Gabe. The first half of the film is the more enjoyable watch for me, and after that, it's kind of nothing really is that memorable. It's just kind of
It's
on in the background for me.
it's kind of interesting that I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing that you guys feel like the second half is more bleak than the first half.
I
Yeah.
think I mean, the first half's definitely bleak.
For
I
sure.
just think the second half, like stylistically, like the first
Mhm.
half, this could also be how it's edited, how it's shot. It's the first half is so much more memorable for me.
Mhm.
I think that's where most of the momentum is, and I think it just kind of loses a bit of that in the second half for me.
I yeah, because I feel like the first half, it's better put together, it's better constructed, it's even maybe even I gotta watch it again, but shot better. But I think to
Yeah,
me personally, I know Chase was talking about like the sprinkled stuff with that drill sergeant because he's freaking some of the shit he says is like hysterical.
Yeah.
But at
yeah,
the same time, it was like almost like a juxtaposition thing for me where he's saying all this funny shit, but like Private Pile, like it's so bleak to me because like this guy, I mean,
mm.
I always remember that scene, where they hold him down and they take the soap bars, they put him in the towels, and they just like beat on him
Oh, it's
while they're holding
abuse.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's just like
horrible.
this
Like
whole
some of the
like
shit in
40
there is
minutes of
bad
emotional and
to
physical
watch.
abuse. Yeah, like it's like
Yeah,
for me personally, which is kind of weird, right? Because the second half is like actual war, actual violence. But for me personally, like the first half of that movie is more bleak than the second half. The second half to me, it's kind of like what I explained. Like these guys are already natural born killers, kind of like what they even chant sometimes when they're marching. And it's like I don't
yeah.
understand what the second half was about. Like, what were you trying to say?
Yeah, because 'cause you're kind
Um,
of expecting that from them at that point where and I
mhm,
agree with what you're saying with, like, the whole beatdown with the bars of soap. I mean, that violence is much more I think it's the fact that it's on a such a smaller scale, whereas, like, the second part,
It's just
and we've
mass.
talked about this before,
yeah,
when you kinda open this up, if you're telling a certain type of story that's much more intimate and then you try to open that up, I think there's ways to go about doing that, and then there's ways where it doesn't work out so well, and I think Full Metal Jacket's one of those examples where I just think it kind of loses that personal touch that it had in the first half. The first half resonates with me much more than the second half. In
mhm,
terms of scenes that I can look at, like we're just talking about the beatdown scene. I mean, it's horrible to watch, but that's something that I immediately remember when I think of this movie. I don't remember much from the second half, because it's just kind of a chore to continue to follow it.
yeah.
And I
But
do want to piggyback off something you said, Will. Like, you never think of this as like, because my dad was super into war movies growing up. So, like, I
mm,
can't even name the ones that were probably, I'd have to rewatch them, like, oh, yeah, I've seen this, you know?
mhm,
Yeah.
But somebody hit me. I never knew that was a Stanley Kubrick movie. And then it was probably like 6 or 7 years ago. I was rewatching it with somebody, and they were just talking about Stanley Kubrick. I was like, "What does that have to do with this?" you know, I never really like figured that. Of course, like I mean, I was
mhm,
a lot younger and stuff like that. But it was just such a surprise. I was like, versus 2001, you know, Clockwork, everything. Like you can tell it's kind of like Wes Anderson with his whole symmetry thing, right? You can typically
mhm.
tell when you're watching a Stanley Kubrick movie. Just like
Yeah.
you can tell when you're watching a Wes Anderson movie.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's I just never really knew that. You know, it's just so
Yeah.
tonally different from everything else. But I wanted to piggyback off that and say I agree because it's like the sheep of his collection for sure.
For sure. And like again, just to preface that it's or reiterate, I should say that it's a great movie. I mean, it's hard critiquing these movies because we still like them. I'd still
Yeah,
like
they're still
you know,
enjoyable.
like you said, you enjoy Blade Runner. I still appreciate Full Metal Jacket for what it is, but it in terms of the I guess like the pedestal that we hold it on. I think that maybe that's kind of like what we're questioning. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great movie. I still bought the 4K. The 4K looks great.
Yep.
It's sitting on my shelf, and maybe I'll pop it in every few years just to watch it. But it's definitely one of those ones that I'm not kind of. It's not like The Shining where I pop it in every year. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
like Doctor Strangelove where I watch that every once in a while.
God, Doctor Strangelove. Shout out to that
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, and that's a good one where it's like, that's
Yeah.
definitely Kubrick. You definitely get that Kubrick vibe from that movie, and I just don't get it with Full Metal Jacket. So
Actually, to
that's my
piggyback
pick.
off that, like I think
Yeah.
that blends everything that we kind of critiqued just now: comedy, war aspects, and it even has a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
camp there with like the Coca-Cola
Yeah.
machine. I remember
Yeah.
laughing so
Yeah.
hard. He's like, "If
Mm-hmm.
you destroy that, you're gonna have to deal with somebody." I forget the exact verbiage. You're gonna have to deal with somebody worse than us. You're gonna have to
Mm-hmm.
deal with Coca-Cola or whatever he ends up saying. Like I remember just
Yeah.
laughing so hard. I love that movie. Doctor Strangelove is an annual rewatch for me for
Yeah.
sure.
Great freaking movie. But
Yep.
that's my pick. Will, I think you're the last one here. What's the overrated film that you chose?
Yeah, so I want to start off in saying I don't dislike this movie. And I'll talk about the final act of this film because it's something we talked about it before the podcast, but we didn't get into what I like about it. I think the final act of this movie is probably some of the greatest work that this director has done. I just think getting there was kind of a chore for me. My pick is The Irishman by
Mm.
Martin
Okay,
Scorsese.
you're us for a loop.
Mm.
Yeah, so I just like so the whole thing with the de-aging. I know it was an incredible amount of work to be able to do what they did. You know, they had 3 camera setups at most of the time they were filming this movie in order to capture the actors from every angle, as many angles as they could to work with the de-aging technology. I think it works in certain scenes, and there's certain scenes and parts of the film where it takes me out of it, you know,
Yeah,
and you
100%.
guys have heard me talk about this before. I'm all about practical effects. I love practical effects. That's why I respect Scorsese for what he's done throughout his career. He's been somebody
Mhm.
who's always been about practicality. He's up there with the likes of Nolan, who we've talked about many times, in terms of doing as much as you can within the frame on the day on set
Mhm.
and relying on VFX and post production as little as possible, right? And he's all about authenticity, just like somebody like Nolan. I just feel like with this movie, the de aging, it worked in certain scenes, and I don't know if it was because of the way it was lit, like with the lighting. I know that sometimes it's very hard to get VFX to work with certain lighting. It takes a long time to render it properly to make it look natural. And I think that's what takes me out of this movie. There's one scene in particular that I'm sure other people have referenced when he's curb stomping I think it's the baker.
Yeah,
And correct me if
the
I'm wrong,
meme
Gabe.
that came about or the GIF. Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
Became a
So
whole GIF.
yeah, and here's my question, and I don't want to nitpick because I will say though that scene was one of the few that I can remember that kind of just took me out of it because visually I couldn't get over what I was watching. You know,
Mhm.
I was. It's like you're getting involved in the story, you're taking it all in, and then something like that happens, and it's like it's so jarring, you know, to me as a viewer that it just kind of takes me out of the story. Now, here's my question, and I want your thoughts on this, Gabe, and Chase, you
Mhm.
as well. Couldn't they have hired? I mean, with the ability to deep fake, they could have hired a younger actor, right, to at least perform that kind of action, right, to do that stunt. I feel like
100%.
it would have been so much more flawless, right? They could have done that. They could have used the CGI to make it look like De Niro. They could have gotten a body double. I don't get how someone saw that in the editing room and said, "Yeah, this looks fine. This looks natural." It just doesn't. And
It doesn't at all.
there's moments like that that make me question why that was done. And like from what I remember, the budget for this movie was astronomically high.
Yeah, I'll double check it for you
I
while you.
I want to say it was like at least I think it was over 100, well over 100 million. I think more than that.
With
Because this was
Scorsese, probably more than that.
I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised if it was anywhere from 200 to 250 million.
Budget was 159 million.
159 million. Okay,
Yeah,
so with a
pretty decent budget.
$160 million budget, they couldn't find a stunt double to do that.
I
And
will say
again,
that's just because I'm gonna try to defend this movie because I freaking love it.
yeah,
But I will say that that's the one part I agree with you on because I remember seeing it and that scene took me completely out of the movie and I was almost laughing at it just because I tried to follow up on what happened. I saw behind the scenes stuff where De Niro was talking about they had him like in not physical therapy but kind of like some like physical therapy where they're focusing on like body posture and how to
yeah,
kind of make him move younger because like that was the issue like obviously the CGI stuff was going to be handled post production but like he needed to
mm,
move like he was younger too. That
right,
did not translate at all during that scene. You can see that it's like I don't know how old he was supposed to be in that scene, like maybe like 40. It was like
mm,
a 70, 80-year-old man's body with a 40-year-old face kind of stamped onto it and it completely took me out of the scene. So I agree
mm,
with you on that part for sure. It was poorly constructed, and with the technology they have, I mean, I see people on YouTube make freaking these deep fakes that look freaking incredible. They'll throw freaking Harrison Ford's face on, this other guy, and it's like, dude, that looks better than what Scorsese did on The Irishman.
mm.
So
So
I
let
agree
me
with you
throw
on that
this out
part.
there because I haven't. Let me preface this. I haven't seen The Irishman. I'm recently, like I said earlier about Shutter Island, diving into Martin Scorsese. My next one's
Yeah,
gonna be Raging Bull, but whether it's a spoiler or not, while you guys were talking, that's why my head was down. I was watching it on YouTube just so I could chime in to a degree. I had to feel like I had to be a part of it. But I mean, as far as I know, Martin Scorsese, he's a purist. I mean, look at how many times like Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro has appeared in like various ones of his works and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So it's like, is that even an option that crosses Scorsese's mind? Like using a body double, doing anything but like what kind of transpired? You know what I mean? Like, look,
Yeah.
literally, I can name like 5 of his
Scorsese,
movies.
he's a perfectionist though. I mean, he's one of the greatest directors that ever lived, hands down. And I'll say that like I don't dislike this movie. I'm not one of those people out there that like are hating it and think it's the worst thing ever. I think it's again, the last act is some of the darkest moments I think that he's ever done in terms of, Frank's character. I believe it's Frank
Yeah, Frank.
growing old and just it's
Living
I
with
guess
what
I
he
can
did.
say just living with what he did, and I just
Hmm.
think that was so well done in the way he really touches on those intricacies of how he's going through the rest of his life, just miserable.
Hmm.
That was amazing, right? There's parts of it that I can really appreciate. I guess I could say like if I look at Goodfellas is more of like a pop song everybody can appreciate. I
Hmm.
think the editing and the pacing in Goodfellas are much more in line with what I guess I was expecting from this. Now, in defense of this, I can say I guess you can look at The Irishman and say that this is a much slower story, right? Um, that's okay. I just feel like you could have taken a lot out of it. They could have cut like 90 minutes out of this movie, and I feel like it would have been they would have been able to do with. I just feel like it was bloated at parts. Like there
Hmm.
was just a lot of it that was slow for me, that didn't resonate. There were times where I'm like looking at the watch, like, oh damn, okay. It's like there's movies that I can watch. I don't recognize the runtime. Like I'm hoping when I see Killers of the Flower Moon, I don't have the same problem that I had with this. And I'm hearing that Killers of the Flower Moon, Gabe, you mentioned it's paced a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I guess I can. I'm wondering if whether or not because from if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, this was a Netflix release,
Yes.
right?
It was,
I
yeah.
don't know if it released in theaters. You
No.
correct me
It
if
had
I'm
a.
wrong.
I think it did
Did
have a
it?
limited. It had a limited
Or had
run
a
in
limited
theaters.
release.
Or let me see. Hold on one
I
second.
was gonna say
I can
because
double
wasn't that
check.
before? Because wasn't Glass Onion Netflix's first limited run?
Let me see. Blah 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 blah. 23 minutes featurette.
Oh yeah. While you're looking that up, that bakery scene. How did I? Because I haven't seen the movie, so I just finished it while you guys were talking. He's not even curb
Yeah.
stomping the guy. He's like just looks like he's smushing a hot dog on the ground and kind of like
His foot's not
boogieing to
even
it.
touching
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at his foot's not even touching him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it said it had a limited theatrical release. I think it was
Okay.
probably for like a week or something, or 2 weeks, and then
Interesting. I didn't know
Yeah,
Netflix
So
did
my-
that before Glass Onion.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember Glass Onion having a limited release. I wasn't sure about The Irishman just because of the runtime, right? Because so
Mhm.
here's my point, right? Like Netflix released it theatrically for a limited time. So seeing as Netflix produced this, Netflix isn't a traditional studio. They don't necessarily care about runtime. So
Mhm.
and correct me if I'm wrong again, with Killers of the Flower Moon, I think that's Apple. I don't know if it's Apple co-producing with or co-distributing with Paramount. I'm not sure how that
It's
I thought they
Apple,
funded
and
it.
I think I think it's gonna have a. I think it's gonna have a longer theatrical run. I don't think it's limited.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Apple TV Plus under the Apple Original Films label, and like I
Oh, it
said,
is.
Paramount. Yeah.
Oh, so
Um,
Paramount is involved. Okay. I
yeah,
was
and
just
there's an
curious how.
unspecified streaming release date on it. So like, I mean,
Okay.
they'll probably keep it for a few weeks until it stops making money, and then
Yeah.
post it up for streaming. But I mean, like uh,
So if I may,
with
though,
yeah, go ahead, man.
no, I just want to say, so that's one of my questions is whether or not, because this was made for, I mean, it was given a theatrical run, although limited, it was made more for streaming. I don't know if it was a situation where Netflix was like, and Scorsese's at the point in his career where he can pretty much do whatever the fuck he wants, right? Like, there's not a lot of
Yeah.
people that are going to question what he wants to do. It's like, okay, he wants to make this movie, sure, here's 300 million, have a ball. I wonder whether or not, like when a director is unrestrained like that, if it was a situation where it's like, okay, hey, I can make this 4 hours if I really want to, you know.
Mhm.
I question whether or not it was a situation where it's like, okay, let's touch on this, let's touch on every aspect, but to the point where it was too much, right? Like, okay, now it's too
Yeah.
bloated. I feel like they could have trimmed it down a little bit, and that's really my main criticism. I think the third act was done really, really well.
Mhm.
That was probably my favorite part of the movie. Other than that, just the de-aging didn't necessarily work for me, throughout. It was, I don't know, it was just, it wasn't balanced, right? There were scenes
Yeah.
where I thought it looked okay, and then there were scenes where it just took me out of it. And I'm not just talking about the scene at the bakery, right? That's obviously the most apparent where it's just, but again, something like that can be so jarring. It really kind of takes you out of that world. And I feel like that was the case with this for me. I
Mhm.
want to watch it again. But I just think it was an issue with pacing for the most part, at least in the first two acts. Now I will
Yeah.
say, as far as the performances go, they're mostly great. I mean, Pesci is fucking phenomenal. I actually
hell
think
yeah.
Pacino did great in this. I loved
Mhm.
him as Jimmy Hoffa. He was probably the most convincing out of everyone.
Mhm.
I couldn't get enough of him. I thought he was fantastic.
It's hard to debate this one because, like, I mean, obviously at an hour, like a runtime of 3.5 hours, like that's 100% a solidified take is to say, that you could have trimmed
Yeah.
some of this movie because 3.5 hours is a long fucking time. So, yeah, and I agree with you. Some of the de-aging technology, it took me away sometimes, and especially with where we're at with it, where just people, on their computer can probably do a better job at home. I think that, yeah, there were scenes that took me away from it. I think that the reason I love that movie so much is because kind of like what you mentioned, Will, that the final act where you're just kind of getting to the point of how he's coped with the decision he made and how it's impacted his life. And I think
Yeah.
it's not just like from like a mob kind of mafia perspective, but just it translates to just as human beings, like when we grow old and we reflect back on our lives, like regrets that we have or things that we wish we had done differently. Like I think
Yeah.
it really touches on that and resonates. At least it resonated with me on that perspective.
Right.
Um, and at least for me, I was never really bored with it. I thought the pacing was great. Killers of the Flower Moon, I will say, probably has better pacing than The Irishman does.
Okay.
But and then like what you mentioned, man, the performances. I think this is probably one of my favorite Joe Pesci performances, just because we're so used to him seeing so like a lot of the roles he takes, he's so like loud and rambunctious and like like he gets kind of
Yeah.
typecast sometimes. And this one, he's
Yeah.
like so chill, but he's so ruthless at the same time. He's just like
Yeah.
this mobster who's like he doesn't raise his voice much. He's just super calm and collective, but he does a lot of ruthless stuff. So this one, I love this movie. I've seen it probably even with its runtime. I think I've probably seen it like 3 or 4 times.
Golly, man.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
it's a
I was expecting that.
really, it's just yeah, man. Just I think the whole theme of betrayal is kind of like where like you kind of see it coming because you already know the history of it, and if you don't know the history of it,
Right.
it would be interesting to see how you kind of jump into the movie. But for me, I already kind of knew the history of like what
Yeah.
supposedly happens. But it's just this whole theme of betrayal that I would say that the moment it happens, the moment the betrayal happens, without spoiling anything, it was probably some like the most emotional, like at least climax I've seen for a while.
Yeah.
Just because like it's almost unfathomable that you can even picture that happening, but apparently that's how it happened, quote unquote. So yeah, man, I mean, I just think it's like classic Scorsese. I loved that movie. And I think a lot of people, I know it got nominated for a whole bunch of awards and it didn't win anything. So
Right.
I think I like it more than other people do, for sure. I think like it's one that I really hold at a high pedestal, but when I talk to people about it, they're like, yeah, it's a good movie, but it's not like his best work. And I would definitely probably put it up there with his best work, personally.
Okay.
Yeah. Chase, you got to watch it, man.
No, for
Yeah,
sure. Next month, it's Alfred Hitchcock, Scorsese, and a little bit of Lynch sprinkled in there because I have every one of Lynch's 4Ks that have come out. I just haven't watched them.
Well, we got to find the time to. And when you hear 3.5 hours, you're kind of like,
Oh
crap.
my golly, I got to break that into like intermissions in 3 parts.
Yeah, and Killer, and I know you. Maybe I'll do a review for it. I don't know if I get time for the channel to do a review for it, or if you guys end up watching it, we could do a review together. But Killers of the Flower Moon, man, I'd probably put that as my top 3 or top 5 for the year. It was a friggin' phenomenal.
Oh yeah, that movie looks good. I'll definitely watch that.
I would say like De Niro, like I mean everyone does a good job, but like De Niro's character for sure resonated with me, and I think he did a freaking outstanding job. If he doesn't get nominated for like best supporting actor, I'd say that's a crime. But yeah, I mean he and it's weird, like you mentioned. Well, he made The Irishman 3.5 hours. Now he's Killer of the Flower Moon 3.5 hours. It's like he is kind of maybe. I don't want to say unrestrained because to me, like these movies, I haven't had any issues with the runtime. So I don't know. We are in this kind of weird area with movies where they're longer than they used to be. I mean, the Batman was like 3 hours, wasn't it? Or close to 3 hours when the Batman came out.
Yeah.
And then with that Marvel which one was it? The Endgame was like 3 hours too.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's also why I love so much like older sci-fi, and I love like movies from like the 60s like to the 80s. There's like a perfect sweet spot between 90 just like 87 minutes to like an hour 45 that's just I can get one quickly in while I'm getting ready for work, in the living room, probably right here where my TV's just on the other side of there, multitasking, like 3 hours. I'm just so happy I have a home theater because, like being able to pause it and stuff like that, and especially like almost 4 hours in a theater, I'm probably gonna miss 20 minutes of that. Just having to,
it's a commitment.
Yeah.
It's a commitment for sure, especially in the theater because, you got to keep in mind, it's like, all right, I guess I can't drink anything before I walk into this movie because I don't.
Dude. I mean, I had my Coca-Cola and my popcorn for Killers of the Flower Moon, but that was like the first thing that I sat down. I was like, I hope I don't need to use the bathroom. Like I waited till like the 4th trailer played or 3rd, and then I went to use the bathroom and then came back. I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it. My buddy went like 2 times during. And then I'm just sitting there like, all right, I got this. Luckily I didn't need to go, but yeah, I mean, like you think about that stuff, you're like, crap, do I need to use the restroom? Or like, I mean, 3.5 hours is a long time. With the trailers, that's like 4 hours.
Yeah,
you're sitting there. It's a while. So yeah, I get your concerns with it. Well, yeah, pace your drinks. But so those are our overrated movies, and again, just to reiterate, I think we all enjoy them.
Mhm.
I just think that there's certain aspects of them that we all kind of, think are overhyped a little bit. But just to kind of, balance things out, I think we were going to mention just some or how would you phrase that? Kind of like underappreciated movies.
Undervalued,
That each
Yeah,
of
we
us
can
underappreciated.
have.
say
Yeah.
underappreciated. I think that's a good word for it.
So
Yeah.
Chase, you have one that you're very passionate about. I know that you want to get out there and mention real quick for everyone. What's your underappreciated movie?
It is gonna be, and I can't believe I didn't grab the Steelbook, but it's gonna be Super 8. This movie just came out at a time, and I mean, by the way, this transfer I don't think does this movie justice because there's a lot of like it's just overly dark, almost Goonie style. But
Mm,
Super 8, it's the most Steven Spielberg, J.J. Abrams movie, which makes sense because it was executive produced by Spielberg, directed by J.J.
yeah.
It just whenever I watched that movie, it just brought me back to a time with like E.T., even like just like prime Steven Spielberg and kind of like I wouldn't call it campy. It's just I really don't know how to kind of pinpoint Steven Spielberg's style, where there's a lot of characterization, especially whenever it's child-focused films like this one.
Yeah.
And then like a slow build up while not just waiting to the very end to give you what you're wanting. It's sprinkled in a great story with some intermingling and intermixing. This is in my personal top 15 movies of all time. Like I just absolutely
Wow.
appreciate this. Yeah, like it's just the whole aspect of like kids just having fun, making a film about um I'll be less spoilery about this one just in case people like want to check it out after I throw it out there. But like the whole setup is like it's called Super 8, so they have a Super 8 millimeter
Mhm.
camera, and they're filming their own type of like little movie. They're just kids having fun, and so there's a little bit of build up to it, and then they capture something on that film that leads them down essentially a rabbit hole about their town and uncovering some more mysteries. And I mean, is it shocking and everything at like the turn of every single thing? No, it can be pretty predictable at some points. I mean, it follows a tried and true formula. I just think like the setup, the setting, and then how things are revealed is different enough to warrant a recommendation. I think the camera angles, the cinematography done in it is just classic and so refreshing at the same time. It's just a fantastic movie. As it says on the back of this 4K, it's an instant classic. So that's what I'm gonna back up their words. It's just a really fun movie, and I'm super passionate about that. And I'm surprised more people don't talk about it. Like I really do find it well done. I watch it every year, and I just remember going and seeing it in theaters whenever that movie came out,
I,
2011. Yep.
I gotta rewatch it, yeah, because I haven't seen it since it came out in theaters. That's where I originally saw it, and I remember coming out of it, kind of like what you said, where it just kind of had that formula. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like kind of like where you kind of know where it's gonna go. So I'd be interested in seeing it now, because like I think maybe kind of like what we talked about earlier. Sometimes you just watch these films like 10 years later, and
hmm
you just have this kind of different perspective. I mean, your tastes change. You're looking for different things. So I'd be curious to watch that today and see how I feel about it.
I think you'll like it. I mean, it's just got like this different, and I think it came out around the time as like Cloverfield, not too long after
Hmm.
that. Like, what was that 07, 08? So it was kind of following that little, again, not to give too much, but a little bit of a creature feature kind of aspect. And that's pretty much as I'll kind of allude to that. As I just think it does a tried and true formula different enough to warrant, throwing out there. In that category, this is my favorite one, and it's more sentimental for sure. Am I trying to sit here and say it's a masterpiece? No, it's a 10 out of 10 in sentimental value because of like whenever I
Hmm.
watched it, it was kind of the first of that time that I had really watched anything that in that formula, especially in like 2011. Yeah, because I really didn't watch a lot of movies around that time. I really didn't get into like hardcore movie watching until about 8 years ago. So pretty much it was easy to blow my mind around that time. So that's
Yeah.
probably why it's got a little bit more sentimental value.
I think
And
that's what
yeah,
the underappreciated thing, the whole aspect of a movie being underappreciated is just like what you said, sentimental value. You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like a lot of these movies may not be like critically kind of acclaimed or, whatever, but I mean if we hold kind of like the nostalgia or that sentimental value to it, I think that that's why we give it the time it deserves.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I love that movie. Just bummed
that's
I
a
didn't
good
get a
pick.
steelbook,
Oops.
but yeah.
What was the steel? I don't even remember the steel book for it. Was
And
it
honestly, I think
like
that's why I didn't get it. It wasn't that cool.
oh yeah, it was kind of like free. Wasn't it just like all yellow or something like that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It
I
kind of looked
think
like The
I have vague
Shining.
memories of it. The Shining one was kind of dope though. I
Yeah,
think it's
it didn't have that much intricate design and like the etchings on it though. It was
yeah.
just plain, and I think it
I'm
was a few dollars more, not like a similar price point.
I'm gonna try and watch Super 8 maybe here in the next month because I kind of want to see it again. I some people on the server have talked about it here and there.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen it in so long. It's just kind of like, let me watch this movie again and see what it's about. Um, my underappreciated movie, I think it's not underappreciated in the sense of like, I think this movie did well critically when it came out, but I think it kind of like did well critically and then it was just kind of slept on afterwards. Like no one ever mentions it. And it is, I think you had said, Will, it's Adam McKay, right? Who did The Big Short.
Yeah, Adam McKay directed it, and I believe he
Uh,
wrote it as well, writer director. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah, so Adam McKay, The Big Short. It's about the '07, '08 financial crisis, specifically going to like the housing market and all the shady shit that the banks were doing. And it's really, I think the reason I love that movie so much is just because it has so many different elements to it. It has like dark humor in it. It has like a lot of dramatic scenes in it, like the pretty emotional scenes too. Um, and it's just almost like a I hate saying like a crime movie too. I mean, there's like a lot of illegal shit going on, but
Hmm.
it's all white collar crime. You know what I mean? So like, it's not like you're seeing people, like getting shot or kidnapped or whatever it may be. But it has all these like weird elements that kind of like fuse together like really really well. And then you get like people like Christian Bale's in it. Who else was in it? Steve Carell, Brad Pitt, Ryan Gosling. Like
Ryan
they had a
Gosling, yeah,
great
all-star
cast and
cast.
awesome. They all did a freaking incredible job on it. And I think it's just one of those movies. At least it resonates with me, with the kind of like the theme of just greed. You know what I mean? Like it's something that we see
Yeah.
even today when we're talking about the economy and the state of the economy and the banks and the housing market. We're always asking, is there another bubble? Is there another crash coming? And who's responsible? And it's that movie. I reflect on it sometimes because I'm like, it's just kind of us repeating history in a way.
Mm,
And I think that movie just delves into not so much like kind of like the economical aspects of everything, but it just delves into like just human greed really, really
yeah.
well. And also questioning, these guys are trying to cash in on that greed. And and is that right? Is it okay for them to do that? Because it is kind of like this hypocrisy that they have to kind of deal with. So it's just a freaking amazing movie. And some of the I don't know if you've seen it, Chase. Have you seen The Big Short?
No, I actually was going to ask you a couple of questions, like the way with the director, and then especially anything Steve Carell is. He's hardly serious. Is it pretty comedic? Like
There are a
despite
lot
all
of
that.
funny moments in it.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's
like there,
funny
I was
moments.
gonna bring up. There's these like takes where it's like, they're dealing with all this like financial jargon. Like you're like, what the hell are they talking about? And then Ryan
Yeah.
Gosling will like break the fourth wall and say like, you probably don't know what the fuck we're talking about. So here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath to explain what we're talking about. And just cuts to Margot Robbie like
That's
in a
amazing.
bubble bath explaining like all this like financial jargon stuff so you understand. And then it cuts back to like just a lot of like
That sounds
funny shit
great.
like that. Yeah, but
Yeah.
then there's a lot of like dramatic shit happening at the same time too. People are losing their homes and people are losing money and it's like it's just this blend of just everything just comes like together really really well. And I
Yeah.
know it was like critically acclaimed when it came out. I don't remember if it won any awards or Oscars or anything like that, but I feel like it kind of came out and then no one talked about it. And for me at least, I watch that movie at least like once a year. Like I always like when I can, I'll pop it in to watch it just because I love the pacing of it. It's just really well constructed with such a complicated topic. Like they put it together in a way where like anyone could watch it. Um, so I'd highly recommend it if you guys haven't seen The Big Short
Oh yeah, I
to
just
check it
added
out.
it to my watch list. That
Yeah, I
sounds
dig it.
amazing.
It kind
Yeah.
of touches on a few different genres too. It's like you said, it's like a crime movie, but there's also like comedic elements in there. So it's like a
Hmm.
crime comedy, like drama film. I will say Steve Carell like sold the show for me,
Oh,
and
100%.
Chase, you mentioned like he's usually known for like less serious roles. He did amazing, and I mean everyone's good in it, but I think Steve Carell in particularly was somebody that I admired. It was refreshing to see him play a character that was a little more straightforward, realistic, more of a serious tone to his performance. Like that was great. I mean, I think he plays Mark Baum, who
Yep.
works
Yeah.
for. He's like they're one of the like he works for the firm. I think he's a fund manager, if I'm not mistaken. Gabe, you can
Hmm.
correct me, but they figure out what's going on. They get like a tip from Ryan Gosling's character, um as far as what's happening and what these Wall Street guys and what these Wall Street firms are doing. And then you have Christian Bale. I think he plays that guy Mike Burry, who he's one of the guys that predicted the crash in
Mhm.
'07 and '08. So you kind of have all these characters. Christian Bale doesn't really, his story's kind of separate from what I remember.
Yeah, he kind of like, I mean, all these stories are kind of separate. You're following like three different stories. You have Christian Bale's kind of
Yeah.
story, you have Steve Carell's story, and then you have the one with like Brad Pitt and those two young guys starting their own firm.
Yeah, I forget
But
about
they're
the Brad
all
Pitt and the other guys.
they're all working like on the same tip pretty much. Like they all kind of figured
Right.
out like what's going on behind the scenes with Wall Street, and then they're all trying to cash in on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Steve Carell, like it's a very I mean, he has like some funny one-liners in the movie. But it's also a very dramatic role too, because I think he's the one that's dealing a lot with kind of the whole, ethical dilemma where it's like, hey, we're cashing in on, people losing their homes and people
Yeah.
losing jobs. And it's like, do we do this? Do we don't? But at the same time, he wants to say, fuck you to the establishment, fuck you to the bank. So
Yeah.
it's just a super well-made movie, man. Super
I
well-made
think there's
movie.
even a line that he says in the movie where he's like, I hate these guys so much. I just want to see them fucking go down,
Yeah.
It's super
He
engaging.
hates the fucking banks, man, and
Yeah.
it's just but he's part of that culture too. Like you said, he manages a hedge fund and he's about making
Yeah.
money, but he hates the very thing that he's a part of. So it's like this whole interesting kind of thing that his character deals with. But yeah, super great movie. I did check it up. I think it won. Oh, it won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay because it was from a book. And it was
cool.
nominated for a few other things. But
Hmm.
then it kind of like after it happened, it just kind of people don't bring this movie up a lot. And I've been waiting
No,
for
yeah.
a 4K for it, and I don't think one's ever come out. I just have the Blu-ray for it. So highly recommend it for you guys to check that one out.
I'll check it out.
Cool.
That sounds great.
Will, what's your underappreciated movie?
My underappreciated film is a movie from 2002 starring Christian Bale and I believe Taye Diggs, called Equilibrium. So
Equilibrium. I remember that one.
this was yeah, it was in the early 2000s. There was a lot of like Matrix type movies coming out at that period of time, obviously cruising off of the popularity of the Matrix, but I will say this is one that stood out to me. We talked about Aeon Flux and Ultraviolet and some of those other movies. I just think as a dystopian film, it just it's weird, right? Because it has this weird balance of not taking itself too seriously, but at the same time, pretty much conveying its message without getting too philosophical. You
Mhm.
know, I tend to not like some of these dystopian movies that try to do something bigger than what they're made for. It's just
Yeah.
they try to be bigger than what they should be. And I feel like in their attempt to do that sometimes they forget that they should also try to be fun and just enjoyable to watch, right? So it stars Christian Bale. It's like this weird thing where there's these things. I think they're called like sense offenders in the movie. I did a little bit of research to refresh my memory here.
Real
And what
quick, Will.
happens?
This is the one with the
Yeah, go ahead.
gun kata, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I've seen this movie because
yeah.
like
There's a lot of like,
okay,
play in this movie. Yeah.
okay.
So essentially, it's a dystopian future. Feelings are outlawed. So all emotions are outlawed. They take this weird drug. I don't know if I think it's like a shot that they take or a pill that pretty much causes people to lack emotion. So they don't feel anger or any kind of joy or anything like that. And it's essentially on the premise that, well, you know what? In order to save humanity, we have to like erase humanity in terms of how we feel, right? Because like feelings are getting in the way of survival, and there's just like these qualms about that. But I just think in terms of the special effects, there's a lot of great stunt work and choreography in this movie that isn't talked about. And here's the thing: I don't know how many people are even going to remember this movie because it came out at a time where there were a lot of movies trying to do the same thing. But it has vibes. Obviously, there's Matrix vibes in it. There's similarities to the Matrix. There's similarities to movies like Gattaca, which I really enjoy. I'm a big fan of Gattaca. But there's a movie I actually kind of want to reference as well, which is V for Vendetta, right? So
Love that
in
one.
in V for Vendetta, yeah, great movie. In V for Vendetta, there's a lot of it's much more philosophical. Now, V for Vendetta is obviously based on a graphic novel, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a better movie than the comic book, in my opinion, as a film. Um, but like with V for Vendetta, from what I remember, it tries to go for like this kind of like this moral. I guess it's like a moral gray area where they're kind of questioning. It's like you don't really know who's good or who's bad, right? With Equilibrium, it's pretty straightforward. You know right away. There's no question who the bad guys are, who the good guys are. I think it's like the sense offenders, as I mentioned. They're the good. The totalitarians are bad. You know, humans can't live like robots. That's like the basic theme, of the movie. I just think it's action packed. I just think the action scenes are so well done. Some of the visual effects are a bit dated, but that's to be expected. I mean, this is like the early 2000s. But other than that, there's not too much CGI or VFX in this movie, which is good. So it doesn't take away from it, right? And again, the whole worldview of the plot is that removing humanity is the best way to save it. So you have like the pain and the loss that these characters are feeling, that are essential parts of living. Otherwise, like we're just like kind of existing like existentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it finds it finds that balance between being fun and kind of presenting its message without getting like too philosophical, which is again what I feel like some of those other dystopian movies try to do. So I would definitely check it out. Christian Bale and Taye Diggs are I'm trying to remember. I think Sean Bean's in this movie as well. So for Sean Bean fans, it's another
Oh
great
yeah, he
Sean
is in
Bean
that
movie. And
movie.
Sean Bean's
Damn.
pretty good. But yeah, check that out. Again, it's been panned as like, oh, it's like a Matrix ripoff, but it's kind of unique in a sense that it
It
kind
had
of
its
does
own
its own
unique
thing.
story for sure. I
Yeah, I
remember
mean,
I
it was
haven't
a
seen
little
it
bit
for
different.
years. Yeah, I haven't seen it for years, but I did like the whole kind of like what we touched on with Blade Runner, right? Where you're like questioning humanity, like that brings up those philosophical questions. It's like the
Hmm.
suppressing emotions. I think wasn't it something like they were blaming like emotions for like wars that we have and stuff like that, like the pretty
Yeah,
much
they're
like
pretty
human
much.
conflict.
Yeah, they're blaming human emotions for all the like pretty much blaming what it is to be human for everything that's wrong with the world, right?
Hmm.
Like emotions are getting in the way of humanity, achieving a state of superiority or progressive. It's stopping humanity from moving forward, right?
Yeah.
People's emotions are getting in the way of real progress, and so the only way to prevent that is to eliminate emotion from the picture. So,
And
and
correct me if
that's
I'm wrong, Will. I think
yep.
it's been so long since I've seen it. It was like Christian Bale's character, like was like he stopped taking his injection or something like that, and then he
Yeah,
starts
I
experiencing emotion. So he starts kind of understanding like, well, shit, this isn't right or this isn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, and that's where the moral conundrum comes in, right? It's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, we've been living this way for so long, and it's worked, but at the same time, we're forgetting what it is to be human, right? We're forgetting what makes being a human being, so essential, right, to
And he was an
life, right?
enforcer too of that stuff, of the kind of dystopian Christian Bale's character. He enforced
He
that
is,
stuff.
yeah. Yeah, so him and Taye Diggs are their characters, or they're kind of enforcers that are working for whatever you want to call it, the authority in
Hmm.
the movie. But again, I just think it succeeds as its message is clear and concise. It doesn't try to get like it doesn't try to interrupt anything about the movie that's fun, like the action scenes or anything that's straightforward with any kind of like there's no like big philosophical lecture or anything like that.
Just fun.
So I just like it for like it's just a fun like sci-fi, futuristic dystopian action movie. I think it's done
Hmm.
really well. And again, I think this came out before movies like Aeon Flux and Ultraviolet and a lot of movies that tried to take a similar approach. So it was one of the first ones to come after The Matrix, but also before all those other films. So yeah, definitely check that out. And Christian Bale, I forget what else he was doing at the time, but from what I remember, this is one of the first movies I think I saw him in, when I was younger. So
Mm.
I kind of got me
Yeah,
interested
it's
in
like
Christian Bale and his
2002,
work.
right? I think it was when it came out.
Yeah, 2002, 2001 or
Let's see.
2002.
Yeah, it was '02.
Yeah. Kurt
Yeah,
Willing.
I don't know what was he doing at that time.
American
I
Psycho,
know.
Like
right?
years.
Yeah,
Oh
so
yeah, I
yeah,
think that was like
American
earlier,
Psycho.
right? Before that.
I think
Let's
American
see.
Psycho was 1999 or 2000.
Oh
Yeah, so he
yeah.
did. Oh yeah, he did.
So he was still up.
Yeah, yeah. So that was like 2 years prior. He done Rain of Fire.
I did want to back up, you will. It's been, just like Gabe said, I've seen this movie, but it has some of the
Yeah.
most fun action sequences from a movie around that time, just like purely enjoyable. That one I have seen because I remember the gun kata aspects being memed to death, just saying it was goofy fun, and I remember checking it out for that, and it ended up being better than what people were saying. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Check that one out for sure.
Gun kata, like that's something, and like as much as you can poke fun at it, like it at least tries to be unique in that
Yeah.
sense. It separates it, even today, like looking back and like watching it, I'm gonna rewatch it at some point, but that separates it from other movies at the time. And Kurt Wimmer, I think he's the director.
Yep.
I've seen his name before. I think he did like Law Abiding Citizen, and like I think he did the remake. I don't know if he directed it. I think he either helped write it or did the screenplay. The remake of Total Recall.
He was the
I
writer.
think
Yep, I'm looking at that right now. But he
did
was the
that
writer for Law
movie.
Abiding.
He was okay,
But not the
and I think the
director.
only other thing I've seen him in was that movie Salt
Yep.
with Angelina Jolie.
Yep, he was
Yeah,
the
I
writer
remember
for
that
that one. He directed Ultraviolet too.
Interesting. His style is pretty. I'd say it's pretty consistent. Like
He did the
throughout
new
those
Children of the
different movies.
Corn.
Oh, he did do Ultraviolet.
Oh.
That explains why they're so similar.
I'm like,
I
oh.
Oh, Children of the Corn.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
did
the
Children of
act-
the Corn.
The action scenes are definitely solid. I think
Yeah.
like the martial arts and like the gunplay and everything, it was pretty cool. I know obviously it was kind of coming off of, the Matrix at the time, but it's definitely, I think it stands on its own. I remember some of those fight scenes, and I can say like, if I haven't watched a movie in over like that one I haven't seen over at least like 10 years.
Yeah.
If I haven't seen a movie in 10 years, but I remember some of the fight scenes, I'd say that
Memorable.
that says something. Yeah, it's memorable and it stands out. So I got to
Yeah,
rewatch
there's
that one again.
scene. The one scene where I think he like kicks down a door and it's like this dark room and there's everyone he's shooting in all directions. It's
Yes.
kind of cool, and you see like the bullet holes. I mean, that was kind of there's some cool moments and cool action setups in it. So it has its memorable moments for sure.
Yeah, got to check that one out. I think there's a list now. I'm going to do Super 8 and Equilibrium, and probably if there's other people on the Reddit or Discord that mention some underrated movies, maybe to rewatch them. Just because it's been so while since we've seen some of these too, that it's kind of hard to, process and think about what we thought about them at the time. So, yeah. I don't know if you guys had any other honorable mentions you wanted to throw out there before we finish up. I know. I mean, we're going to bring up other ones like Avatar. I think that one's been talked about enough. We talked about Titanic. There are a lot of overrated movies that we can kind of touch on, but we wanted to try to find some different, unique ones that a lot of people haven't brought up before, just to kind of process that with you guys and see what you think. So let us know what you think with the overrated selections and the underappreciated selections, and we look forward to seeing you guys. I think next week we have that special Halloween episode, right? So a special Halloween,
Ooh, yeah, Halloween.
spooky
Halloween
episode, yeah. So we look forward to seeing you guys then, and as always, we appreciate you guys, and we will touch base with you guys next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Take it easy, everybody.